Welcome to the five of us. We are five outspoken women with close to 150 years of experience as broadcast journalists. We left our jobs on the very same day, and we are dedicated to helping women avoid the many pitfalls common to the workplace. We've heard from hundreds of people recounting tales of woe on the job, and we have done the research. We're putting it all in a book, and we are here to help. I'm Roma Torrey, and along with Kristen Shaughnessy, Janine Ramirez, Vivian Lee, and Amanda Farinacci, we are the five of us. Hi, everyone. We are back in the new year, and we recently learned some rather surprising news, at least in the global political universe, that the very popular Prime Minister of New Zealand, a woman named Jacinda Ardern, had surprised everybody and announced that she was going to resign and she was planning to leave office in less than a month. That was pretty shocking to a lot of people because she had been pretty popular in recent years, and she had been in office for 5 years and had a successful re-election not too long ago. But this is her brief statement, and I'm going to read it to you. She said, "I'm leaving because with such a privileged role comes responsibility, the responsibility to know when you're the right person to lead, also when you are not. I know what this job takes, and I know that I no longer have enough in the tank to do it justice. It's just that simple." Well, that bit of news sparked a global conversation about burnout, which a lot of people assumed she was experiencing. And the definition of burnout, this is kind of interesting from the World Health Organization, is that it's an occupational phenomenon resulting from workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. Well, that's a technical term for really feeling like shit in the office, right? And being put through the ringer. So that is our topic for today, burnout. And it is something that seems to be a growing problem, at least in the United States. The World Health Organization points to three basic components when you talk about burnout. That's their definition. They say it involves continual exhaustion, cynicism about your work, your job, and your workplace, and feeling less capable about your work performance. So I have to think that the pandemic had a big role in increasing the problems with burnout in the workplace, because so many people were absolutely stretched to the limit during those most difficult years. I think it's still a problem, but hopefully we're growing out of it. But Janine, you were mentioning that it's a problem that may be ebbing to an extent, but we're still feeling the effects of it, and will continue long after the pandemic is over, if that ever happens.
Well, Roma, before the pandemic, the American workforce was already operating on burnout levels, right? High demand, long hours, do more with less. In recent years, we've all noticed corporations, one person leaves a job for whatever reason, and instead of replacing that person with another employee, what they do is they're like, oh, we'll just divvy up the duties and make other people do more. You're doing more with less. So of course that, they don't get the higher title and they don't get more money. They're just doing more work with less, resources and less, not the same amounts of money maybe somebody else was doing, especially if it's a higher up that got let go. And then all of a sudden those duties were handed over. So it benefits the companies. Obviously, they keep more money in their pocket. In New York City, the capital of finance, the capital of media, the capital of fashion. We live here. We know the capital of theater, that burnout is on steroids here. People in New York City, it's the city that never sleeps. And there's always a way to make money here. That's the mentality of New Yorkers. And so then enter their pandemic, and like stress levels weren't high enough. The pandemic strain was completely evident among healthcare workers, first responders, many of us in the media who are out there, all those people on the front lines. But even those who weren't front and center during the pandemic, well, the strain on them was real too. There were feelings of energy depletion, exhaustion, being mentally disconnected from the job, questioning, like, what am I getting from this job? Why am I working so many hours? And you're never really off, right? It's like, even if you I'm going to take a day off or a week off, well, you know what? Your email is always working. Your phone is always working. If somebody wants to get in touch with you from work, they will. And so there's not really that downtime, especially when you're working from home, right? The whole work from home phenomenon. And so, these feelings of being overwhelmed have lingered right into 2023, and it led during the whole of 2022 to and 2021 to this great resignation, to the quiet quitting, and those other reevaluation of work terms. So it's still here, and people are still reevaluating and trying to figure it out, but the burnout is real.
Yeah, and the trend that we've been experiencing recently with the massive layoffs, particularly in the tech industry, you have to figure if 12,000 people leave Facebook, for example, they were doing jobs that other people are now going to have to fulfill one way or another. So somebody's going to be burdened with at least a job and a half, right, to fill the work that was being produced by those poor folks who were let go. So it doesn't seem to end.
And sometimes they may give you a change of title, but that doesn't necessarily mean more money.
Yeah.
Right. So sometimes it's like, okay, we'll give you this title because you're doing more, but you're going to keep on we're going to keep you at the same level of salary.
Right. During the pandemic, the people who seemed to be suffering the most in terms of burnout were healthcare workers, obviously, because they had to deal with treating all these poor folks who were coming into their hospitals and needing serious care. But Vivian, you were talking about the history of the term burnout, which dates back to the 70s, and that it did refer specifically to healthcare workers, right?
It did. There have been a number of articles that came out, especially mid-pandemic and during the pandemic, because burnout had come back in vogue as something that people were talking about. It was a psychologist named Herbert Freudenberger who wrote a paper in 1974 based on his experience as a psychologist working 2 jobs, getting barely any sleep, but noticing that there were characteristics that he shared with other psychologists at this free clinic that he had helped to found in the East Village of New York. So there's a very New York angle to this. He basically put together 2 and 2 and decided that those who are in very deeply committed jobs, where they feel the harder they work, the more impact they will make, are the ones who suffer burnout. And as a psychologist, he was seeing this in other healthcare delivery workers around him. He wrote that paper, and just a few months before him, someone that he did not know named Christine Maslach, I hope I'm saying that right, she wrote an article, another paper that was published academically about burnout happening among human service workers. So she noticed that those people who felt very emotionally drawn to a cause, so poverty, lawyers who work for basically no money, public defenders, people who worked in certain fields such as psychology, as well as direct contact with people who needed basic services. She put the same 2 and 2 equation together. And we have to remember that in the 70s, I read an article in the Washington Post. It was dated last January, and it actually took a look back in time and noticed that in the 70s, burnout was also happening among your rank and file, low wage workers, because their wages peaked in the mid 70s and have been going downhill ever since. So the cost of living, inflation, the 1% phenomenon, all of that starts to really rev up in the 70s. And so people start feeling what burnout is. It shows up in a Bob Dylan song, in a Neil Young song. So there's something that people are recognizing, and that's really the point from which you start to see this as, I know the WHO calls it a syndrome, but a syndrome is not really a treatable condition. It's just a set of very discrete symptoms that have been put together, right? So often syndromes are hard to treat because of that very fact. They're this set of conditions that everyone's trying different tactics to try and deal with. It's interesting, though, that today there's a very different slant on burnout. I think there's a lot of feminist research out there that's showing how burnout has definitely migrated to a more gendered perspective where people are understanding that burnout for women is very particular. There's a set of authors, Emily and Amelia Nagoski, who co-wrote Burnout, that came out in 2020, just as the pandemic was ramping up. And boy, did they call out what women were already going through, and which was totally inflamed by the pandemic, the lack of caregiver support. We've talked about this in previous episodes, and that women in particular suffer from what's known as what they call the human giver syndrome, which is where you're expected to, with a smile, very calmly and never angrily, provide support to the winners of society.
Right. Yeah. You know what, Vivian, I think a lot of women tend to think that the more that they work, and maybe they suffer a little bit, it's almost a badge of honor to prove how much, how eager or how sincere they are about their ability to conduct a job, to perform.
Totally.
Right?
I think Gen Xers in particular, I think, were taught this and were told to expect it because their parents had survived World War II and the Vietnam War, and were told, you are so lucky to have what you have, that we are able to provide. Just suck it up, and do your best, and the rewards will come. And I think there's now a bit of a reset happening, even among Generation Xers, of just how true that is and how much you have to cling to it.
Yeah, well, fortunately, I think, the syndrome, or at least people's perception of the syndrome, has changed to the point where they're living more comfortable lives. But Amanda, I wanted to talk to you about this because the World Health Organization doesn't go so far as to define burnout as a medical condition, even though it results in some big medical problems. And, we mentioned stress can cause all sorts of medical issues that could really harm you. And I was thinking about the case of Grant Wall, who was the sports writer who was working at the World Cup in Qatar, and sadly and tragically died after working very long hours and enduring very little sleep. And so when you talk about the health concerns resulting from burnout, that is a very real thing. And I'm wondering if the World Health Organization should actually change the definition to say that this is a medical condition that needs to be addressed.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that case with Grant Wall is basically he had been documenting for a couple of weeks before he wound up found himself in the hospital and then ultimately died. He had been documenting that he'd been having sickness. He thought he'd had a severe case of bronchitis. He'd been going to the doctor and expressing concerns about this cough that just wouldn't go away. He describes having all this pressure on his lungs that he's fighting, but he's also saying, hey, this is what he's quoted a couple of days before his death as saying, this is what stress and no sleep and lots of work will do to you. And I guess it's a really good measure for I think that's a quote that most people can identify with. I think that anybody can understand when you get in a situation at work where you feel like you've really got to have your shit together and you've really got to keep going, and the work just keeps piling on and piling on and piling on. The condition that they ultimately found that killed him was called ascending aortic and ascending aortic aneurysm. And that condition actually is linked to severe physical and emotional stress because it increases significantly your blood pressure. So I think it would be a good idea, probably at least in the conversation about burnout that's now become so popular, for the World Health Organization to just take a look at it, because we will never know, right, exactly maybe what happened, but the link, it seems like the link is there, right, where he describes feeling very stressed out. He's clearly been on like a whirlwind of work, and then he's describing these symptoms, and then he winds up dead. I will also say, I think you guys, we've kind of talked about this as well. Probably like within the last 10 years or so, I am a person who physically, I feel my stress. Like when I am emotionally affected by something, I feel it in my body. I have had, like, probably 7 or 8 years ago, I actually went to a doctor and I said, I'm having ringing in my ears. I'm having back pain that won't go away. I can't run anymore. I had literally an alphabet's worth of symptoms that were actual real life symptoms that were undiagnosed, and that every single doctor I went to said to me, Amanda, how's your stress level? How's your stress level? And every single time I was like, as a woman, you are, to your point, Vivian, conditioned to just keep going. And it is a badge of honor, I think, where at least for me, my personality, I say like, it's fine. I got it. And I just keep taking more. And at some point, your body is saying, no, you can't. You cannot, because you can't do, all of your things, perform at work, perform at home, and without it catching up somehow. It's just a fact of life. It's just really a fact of life. And I think the way, Janine mentioned before, you can't turn it off, right? Like, we're always connected to something. We're always connected to someone who wants something, who's asking for something. And so I think we could probably have a bigger conversation about this, but I do think like that people should not feel shy about taking mental health days. I think that when you feel that burden start to really sort of suffocate you, you really do have to advocate for yourself in a way that doesn't leave any room for no from a superior, where you have to say like, look, I need this time. I know I have all this other shit going on, but like, I am not okay right now. And in order for me to be okay, I need to step back for like 24 hours and I'll be back in a day or so, because I just think it's just too common now. And I think it's too important given what else is happening, across workplace cultures. I just think it's really important.
Yeah, no doubt. Burnout is bad for your health. I mean, I think that's a fact now. Kristen, we need to hear from you. Let's get back to Jacinda Ardern and her reasons for leaving this prominent position as Prime Minister of New Zealand. At the age of 42, she had a young baby at home, and she made this very controversial decision to step away from it all. And I'd like to know what you think about that, because it has prompted a debate about whether what she did was a smart choice, a responsible choice, or was she just playing into gender stereotypes that women can't handle these jobs, which is very disturbing. But what are you thinking about all of that?
I probably have a contrarian view to this, but I am empathetic to what she is dealing with. But like Amanda said, she could have taken 24 hours. She could have said, I need a week. She could have delegated. But I think to just step down from your position when you've been on Forbes list, on the Time Magazine's 100 most influential, and then that's what you do. We always teach our kids, you got to finish what you start. The election is in October. So I think when you take a job like that, you are obligated to finish it. She didn't have to run for re-election, but I think there was a way she could have done this without there was no explanation aside from like, my tank is not full. Well, you know what? We've all worked when our tank isn't full. You just kind of muscle through. And that's sort of the conversation we're having, right? Like, should you have to do that? But when you're running a country, I think you kind of do. I think if a guy did that, they'd be, just destroyed over it. I'm sorry, my tank's not full, gotta go. And I do think a woman in that position has much more on her plate. She has a child, a young child at home. She gave birth in office, but she had been in parliament since 2008, I think. And she had been in this position since 2017. So before she ran for re-election, she had an obligation, I think, to say, can I finish this term? And if she had any hesitation, I think unless there's a bigger explanation that she's not telling us, that there's something medically wrong or something, but if it's just, I'm tired and my tank isn't full, sorry, I'm not buying it.
Yeah, so. But don't you think, to me, it's kind of a refreshing decision from a world leader, male or female, that when you think you're just not up to the task, and I mean, think about it, you're a world leader, you're responsible for an entire country, millions of people in the population, and if you don't think that you can do a sufficiently capable job, then isn't that kind of bold and courageous on her part to say, I'm not up to the task right now, I need to step away?
Yeah,
and maybe
I think that's a response. I do. She makes, she's worth many millions of dollars. If you're a single mom or a single dad and you're trying to like put food on the table and you're working two jobs, you don't have that choice. So I think more than a bold or courageous, I think it's a very privileged position. And that's kind of my read on that. Yes, it may help us have these conversations, but again, I know I'm on the opposite side of this, but I just I think she could have stuck it out till October, whether she had to delegate everything and just be a figurehead, do that. But women worked hard for so many rights. And then you're just like, oh, sorry, tired, gotta go.
Yeah, but look at Pope Benedict. He stepped away. Why? Right? Oh, mold, I'm tired. I don't, he was leading the world, 1.3 billion Catholics in this world. He stepped away and he didn't get all that backlash that she's getting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think she's getting a ton of backlash, actually. I think people are like applauding the decision, and saying like she left to cheers and applause, but she also might not have won re-election. And I'm a little skeptical of like, was that the reason? You have rising inflation, you have a housing crisis, you've got a bad economy, and your poll numbers are going down. Sorry, I gotta go. I don't know. I'm always skeptical of politicians, as you guys know.
I think though, like to your point, we Vivian and I, we all have kids. My kids are younger, and we do have the conversation of like finish what you started, right? Mm-hmm. But I do think it is a very important and very real and realistic conversation to have with your child, which is to say, like, if you don't think you can do this, or if you know your heart is not in it, that's not a small decision to make, to change course. And I get that the idea is when you are at that level in government and responsibility and whatever, but I do think it's a very big deal. And the fact that she did it publicly and whatever, created a space for someone somewhere who maybe was wavering on the idea that they just knew in their gut that it wasn't working, and they just didn't have the courage to walk away. I think that that's a little bit of I hear what you're saying, because October's not so far away. It's 10 months. But I'm saying, even from my children, like my daughter really likes to play soccer. Before I put her on a travel soccer team, I said to her, is your heart really in this? Because there's a real investment here. We're making a commitment and an investment. If you're not, then get the hell out of here. I'm not going to waste my time. You know what I mean? And those are the conversations that start from a very young age. So I think when you are able to take inventory of yourself and see that you're not where you know you should be, I think there's something really like important about that, wherever
I agree with you, Amanda. I think there is something very valuable in understanding what your vulnerabilities are. And if you are going to choose your mental health or stability, emotional stability, and take that step and boldly say, I cannot do this anymore, I think it is extremely brave. I would argue that in some ways she took a huge step forward for women who have been taught from day one to they have been taught from day one that they have to be accommodating. Girls have been taught this, like in the language that they're supposed to use, or the volume they're supposed to use in public, and what positions they should take. And I think we are at a reckoning moment. I think this is a very healthy debate. I think it's going to be talked about a lot longer than what we're doing here, or just this year. It's going to become a bit of a lightning rod, because in some ways, I think there are a lot of examples of men having been removed from a position out of shame, right? Scandal. And
to give it up,
right? And who refused to give it up, and just like for, ego reasons, held on to it and sunk whatever organization they were part of. I mean, I'm sorry, look what's happening at Twitter, right? And the burnout that's going on there. And people are like actively deciding, this is not good for me. I think for the leader of a country, it definitely is unusual. And it might not set a really good tone right now, but I think the full reckoning is still to come.
There's another aspect to all of this, and that is the workplace. I mean, what were the conditions under which she was working? And I think this story is sort of an indictment of what was going on in New Zealand at the time, because from what I read, what I was able to glean, is that New Zealand was dealing with similar issues to what we were going through, or have been going through here in the United States. It was a sort of a polarized electorate, and Ardern had achieved quite a bit of success managing the pandemic, but it brought out a lot of anti-vaxxers and people who were dead set against all of the measures that she had taken to protect them from contracting the virus. And she was receiving threats, death threats, rape threats, assassination threats. She was a target on social media. People were trolling her right and left. And, the fact that she's a woman, I think, made her a bigger target. If it was a man dealing with, the pandemic, taking the measures that she had taken, I don't think they would have been hit quite as hard. And I think just women in general, women in politics in general, and particularly women of color, have to endure lots more abuse than men. So, that's why I say I think it was a courageous decision on Ardern's part, and maybe even it was something she had to do for her mental health, because she was probably just pushed to the limit. I have to believe that, especially a younger woman. She's 42 with a baby, so it's hard to criticize her. And again, I say, power to you, lady. I think she did the right thing, stepping away and hoping that whoever takes her place will be in a better position to manage running a country. I mean, that's no little job. I think we're running out of time, so it's time to have a quote. And I have one here that actually it's Ardern's own words that I thought would make some sense here, considering the back and forth debate here we've been having. She said, "After going on 6 years of some big challenges, I am human. Politicians are human. We give all that we can for as long as we can, and then it's time. And for me, it is time." Or someone who could put it even more succinctly, Kenny Rogers.
You got to know when to
fold them. So anyway, I think it was a good discussion, and burnout is something that is not going away, unfortunately. We've all experienced it from time to time, and I think young women in particular have to learn when to say no. And if a job becomes just too difficult, too challenging, too abusive, you got to know when to walk away. And that's my last thought. So thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you next time, and Happy New Year. Thanks for tuning in to The Five of Us. We want to hear from you with any questions, ideas, or suggestions for future discussions. Just write to us at the email you see here, and we will be eager to help. Talk to you next time.